a Grain of Sand by Wisława Szymborska, translated by Baranjek and Claire Kavanagh. We call it a grain of sand, but it calls itself neither grain nor sand. It does just fine without a name, whether general, particular, permanent, passing, incorrect, or apt. Our glance, our touch mean nothing to it. It doesn't feel itself seen and touched. And that it fell on the window sill is only our experience, not its. For it is no different from falling on anything else, with no assurance that it has finished falling or that it is falling still. The window has a wonderful view of a lake, but the view doesn't view itself. It exists in this world, colorless, shapeless, soundless, odorless, and painless. The lake's floor exists floorlessly, and its shore exists shorelessly. Its water feels neither wet nor dry, and its waves to themselves are neither singular nor plural. They splash deaf to their own noise on pebbles neither large nor small. And all this beneath a sky by nature skyless, in which the sun sets without setting at all, and hides without hiding behind an unminding cloud. The wind ruffles it, its only reason being that it blows. A second passes, a second, a third, but there are 3 seconds only for us. Time has passed like a courier with urgent news, but that's just our simile. The character is invented, his haste, his make-believe. Can you move it up? Yeah. The character is invented, his haste is make-believe, his news inhuman.
Mm-hmm.
Good reading, Dawn. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was nice.
That was nice. Thank you.
So, any questions, thoughts, concerns that the poem raises?
I really love that poem. And just like the idea of like things outside of us, that it's the human that puts words to things, right? And the sky doesn't put words to sky. The sky just is. And just looking at that through the lens of this wonderful poem, I haven't thought that before. So thanks.
I wonder if some of it, I don't know if she read Blake or was influenced by Blake, but of course, one of his most famous lines is universe in a grain of sand.
Yes.
And this is, and of course, we put the universe in the grain of sand with our meaning making and all that. I just wonder if this is in part a conversation with Blake.
Sounds like it could be. That's a very plausible notion. It brought to mind for me, because I love Wallace Stevens, his poem of Mere Being. You know that poem, Dawn?
Yes, I do.
It's one of my favorites, which I won't recite now, although I have it memorized. It's that idea, the world exists independently of us, and without human meaning, without human feeling, a foreign
Yes,
song.
exactly.
It's a wonderful idea.
It's so great you mentioned Blake, Dawn, because I was searching for his quotation, where man is not, nature is barren, which is a very striking statement. And of course, very anthropomorphic in a lot of levels, but there's something about it that has always lingered with me, where man is not, nature is barren.
Yeah, it's kind of a radical statement, at least for these times. I mean, in the, post-Enlightenment, that would be, yeah, you got that right. Now we're kind of in another paradigm where we're
But
questioning
do we
how big
agree
a
with
deal we are.
do we agree with that? Yeah, do we agree with that idea?
I think there's something to it. I don't know if I fully agree with it, but I also think that I know here in Tucson, probably Tracy, and some of the Tucson people know like the history of the cultivation of agave here. So there used to be, vast fields of agave, and they were cultivated for food, and it also was food for the bats. And then it's interesting, as they stopped cultivating the agave, it's still here, but not like it was. So after I heard that, in my land, I just planted as many agave as I could,
Mm.
and they need a little water every now and then, not much, but this time of year. But I don't know. I think there is something to that, that we can actually be beneficial. So often and also herd animals coming through, not devouring an area, but just the migratory herd animals brought in fertilizer, and things like that, and other species. So people, if they do it right, they can have a beneficial effect, which is nice. We're not all negative.
I'm thinking
Wait,
of the
Blake was,
part of, go ahead.
you can go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking two thoughts. One is that there's a part in Song of Myself where he wants to go and live with the animals because they don't have all our problems. But I do think of so many writers who have said certain words that enabled me to live a more human life. That awoke, so to imagine the self coinciding with itself the way a rock may coincide with itself would be to lose a lot. I think it's just the nature of the self that we don't quite fit with ourselves. And language so often opens up not only other selves to us, but just whole worlds of possibility. Certainly that's been my experience over the years. But I'm not saying this poem is, this poem is a poem, right? So it expresses that longing that we have, if you will, for be less complicated and more at one with ourselves.
Getting back to the where man is not, nature is barren. I mean, barren does not have any positive connotation as far as I know. And so it just seems like there's this pejorative view of nature without human consciousness to view it, or human beings to cultivate it. And I don't know. That rubs me the wrong way somehow.
I think Blake was anti-romantic in some ways. He didn't like Wordsworth's nature poetry because he said the natural man opposes the spiritual man, and
Oh.
I think he also had this kind of Gnostic distaste for nature, that the spirit must lead, that nature is a kind of Egypt at the end of the Book of Uriah, and they leave the earth as if it is Egypt that's imprisoning spirit. But I think he's unusual for a romantic poet, I think.
Mhm. Yeah.
That is so interesting. I'd love to hear more about that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, well, go ahead,
Oh,
please.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say just a little quote from Wendell Berry, who is into the, very much an environmentalist, but his perspective, and I like what Lisa said about that nature is barren, sounds so, but he said there are only sacred places and desecrated places. And I always love that, that anyway, so.
Mm.
I was just going to ask you. I threw in the Blake quote in part because of Dawn bringing him into the conversation, but I don't think Szymborska is necessarily taking that view at all. If anything, in a sense,
I agree.
she's asserting more the power of the world without us.
Mhm.
Okay.
beyond us.
Okay.
Yeah, I would totally concur with that. I just love Szymborska's sense of absolute clarity, and then that the authority of her clarity is so powerful, um, and it's a paradox, right? I mean, in a way, this nature is barren without man, nature is barren is also paradoxical, I think, because you know, in some sense, barrenness is a judgment that man puts upon nature, right? So yeah, but I thank you for sharing that, Szymborska. To me, Szymborska is this magician of the ordinary. You know what I mean? Like, how does she do it? How does she do it? Just say that the things that everybody kind of knows, but she says it in a way what oft was thought but ne'er so well expressed. You know, I mean, so beautiful. I feel like she's, not every poet is a wisdom figure, but Szymborska to me is like kind of a trickster wisdom figure in a sense, you know.
Great phrase, the magician of the ordinary. Love that, Philip. Yeah, and her tricks are so. Of course, we who don't know Polish are not available to her all of her linguistic flourishes, but I mean, she certainly translates well. I mean, she comes across really, really well in the translations I've read of her work. And of course, the fact that it's not locked in form and meter and rhyme helps a lot, I'm sure. Well, let's welcome Lawrence Rue, and he's going to give us a presentation of poems and thoughts on late work, which is a wonderful topic. Lawrence, please.
I thank you. Thank you very much, Lucian, for inviting me. I'm delighted to be reading here with Philip as well. And it's good to see you all. And I mean, late work was I did other kinds of writing for decades, and then as my retirement approached, I began writing poetry almost irresistibly, you might say. And so I was working with a series of poems which I called Late Work, and I just my daughter loved that title because she thought of it in the context of losing 10 points when you turn your paper in late, and that was kind of an amusing other side to it. And then, I mean, one of the things that happened to me when I was doing other kinds of writing was that I specialized in the Renaissance in my scholarly pursuits, but then I began writing about a philosopher, the American philosopher Stanley Cavell, because he writes about Shakespeare. So that was an opening for me. But he also has inherited certainly writers like Emerson and Thoreau in a way that renews them and has created for me an opening to do to write about that. And so, when a thought of Plato becomes a thought to me, time is no more was a little thing from Emerson's history that I threw in there. And I would say in a way, such a thought expresses the nostalgia to be like just an ordinary thing without a consciousness, or have a consciousness that completely corresponds with our own being. So anyway, so that's what where the title comes from. And I have some poems here. I have a feeling that, can I share screen? I'm sorry. Um, uh, can I share screen and just show some of the text as we go along? And I'll read you these various poems.
Yes.
You have to let me in?
I just did. Yeah.
Okay, good. So you can advise me on this, but here comes this. Okay. So since you're recording this, and some of these poems are unpublished, and I have high hopes for them, even though I've gotten used to not realizing such hopes. Would this be a publication if I just shared the text and then the recording was out there, or should I just? I mean, I'd much rather share the text with you.
Well, share the text with us. I'm not putting it out publicly. It's only for those poetry
Okay.
junkies who miss the session
Okay.
and request it. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, then I'll just start with this poem, "Visionary Company." I like to start with it, but also it just has appeared in a publication from North Carolina called One Online, Jacquard Press One. And one of the lovely things about it is that it appears in a host of other poems that are so completely different from mine, and yet that are thematically unified. I think that's the whole point of the way they're being published. So um, having it out and in that context has been a great pleasure for me. So this poem is about a dream that my wife had and shared with me, and it's called "Visionary Company." First thing this morning, 2 cats, a dog, and a lost boy entered from our backyard through the pet flap in your dream. Still half asleep, you told me that you found them in the children's room. Like CEOs with golden parachutes, the cats just went about their business undisturbed. The dog was our beloved Golden, Charlie. He'd lumber through that back door either way, glad to stay if anything was there to eat, or go back out to play. The little stranger made you wonder, who was he and why? Take your pick among whatever terms the nomenclature of the state applies these days to unexpected guests. No, leave that ancient gate ajar. Welcome mystery. Others have handed us along so far in our dark pilgrimage. We've learned strangers may need our help along their way. And then the next poem is a poem called Attachment, and it's for a friend of mine who I actually started a poetry club with when I was in high school. And this is about an episode in our freshman year when we were asked to pick a poem and to talk about it. And this classmate of mine at that time just blew me away. It so happened that that the 12th chapter of the Book of Ecclesiastes was in our poetry anthology, and he chose that, and he just talked about it in a way that I'd never heard anybody with just welcome a text with such admiration. I mean, I was only 14. I probably picked something by Ogden Nash or something like that. But this was extraordinary. So I took this so it's called Attachment for my friend Jim. And it has this passage from Koheleth or Ecclesiastes. And he shall rise up at the voice of the bird, and all the daughters of music shall be brought low. Koheleth's words first caught my ear in ninth grade English. You pictured how dawn's chirping birds disturb light sleeping seniors and ignited my imagination. Now always turns to then, but still your gloss remains a present moment. Remember now your creator in the days of your youth. Planes roar above my sublet quarters near the terminal. An old bird up early. I con your recent versions of Koheleth's verses. Such news, so clearly heard, renews its claim despite the noise of silver birds. The life of words has kept us friends since freshman year. A pixelated paperclip, when clicked, brings you these lines online just now. My breaking news. So then this poem is called Reading Romance with a Lady Killer. And it's about, I did, write a lot about this Italian poet Torquato Tasso, who was certainly the last great narrative poetry of the Italian Renaissance. And he wrote a poem about the First Crusade. And the kind of taste of the age liked romance adventures and pretty women. And so he was living in an age of very rigorous Counter-Reformation orthodoxy, but he would graft these romance episodes into his poem. And all the women in them are pagans and they all convert at last. But anyway, this is I got a teaching job when I was just pretty much out of college in Rome. And so it goes back to then, and then it's set in actually New Orleans, but I warn you, it goes all over the place. When Country Day offered teachers a chance to take one course a year, a kind professor uptown at Tulane agreed to meet and read Italian poetry with me. Thursday's fall semester, we recited passages from Jerusalem Delivered, side by side, on an Audubon Park bench. I'd been divorced 3 years and sober 1. I missed my sparkling brown-eyed ex and met a Jesuit who urged me to forgive her. For what? I'm not quite sure. Once those clouds cleared, I could forgive myself. Who can resist the pagan heroines in Tasso's poem, who all convert at last? Well, most of us. Who's even heard of Tasso hear about nowadays? But I just finished college when I found a high school job in Rome and tried to learn Italian, reading everything: billboards, headlines, historic markers, poems whose power I discovered in the tale of Tasso's Ethiopian Clorinda, runaway daughter of the king and queen, a woman warrior whose black mother faced a mural of St. George the dragon slayer throughout her lying in. Thus, the babe was born as white as any Red Cross knight. Yes, it's complicated. I'm just saying what the poem says. Tancred, a French crusader, glimpsed her beside a spring without her helmet, quenching her thirst, and fell hard for his foe. He turned Petrarchan in the field, all shook up and absent-minded at the sight of her. Through no fault of his own, he killed Clorinda, though he was near enough that fateful spring to baptize her. My teacher and I both loved Tasso. Up north, her teacher, Dante Primo, had taught me too. I learned of her manslaughter charges and conviction later. One night, when her black lover broke into her home, she claimed she didn't recognize him. So, terrified, she shot him in self-defense. My ex's father served as a prison guard in Suriname before he went to prison in Amsterdam for child abuse. She should not be named, of course, but she was called by some Dutch cognate of Maria, like Maureen or Moira in English, Beata Deo by angels anywhere. Her darker siblings had dubbed her Little Nose and Chinaman. I never knew quite why. Our breakup prompted some unkind, wild surmising, but I never really knew. Out of the blue, she emailed me long after we'd stopped all communication. Thanks for loving me for all those years. I'd like to think I earned her thanks, but frankly, Father Ambrose helped me face some facts about myself before he lost his job uptown at Loyola for padding his CV.
Wow.
So then this poem called Cities of Words, it's actually inspired by a quotation on the subway stop at the University of Lisbon. And cities of words is a phrase from Plato's Republic. It's the city of words is where Socrates says that the philosopher can do his business. That's where the action is for philosophy. And so this quotation on the wall is from the life, it's from the trial and death of Socrates, Plutarch's account of that. He says, I am neither Athenian nor Greek, but rather a citizen of the world. Socrates at Cidade Universitaria, metro station in Lisbon. So it goes like this. Words on tiles lining the metro stop remind me of playing Scrabble. Beth's competitive edge caught me off guard. She was playing to win a game I'd won before, taking for granted nothing was at stake. In the myth of my life in Tucson, which, for want of a better word, I call home, my father surprised me like that at golf. How fiercely he wanted to win. But medical practice left him no time to work on his game. Grandfather taught me to play when I was cut from the baseball team. He was 5'2", just about my size, in that old black and white photo of us with clubs in hand. He turned my chagrin into balm with calm dialogues and easygoing lessons, improving my swing on the practice range. My handicap slowly decreased till now, though I stopped playing long ago. My brothers rate me better by far than I ever was. No handicap at all. Gratefully, I agree, as if I believe things improve unseen in this veil of whatever it is we make of ourselves till we play on links elsewhere, naturalized citizens of that world Socrates still calls home. Blue letters there line the wall. Time and again, if you look and see, they claim his part in cities of words all may share. The Athenians, you'll recall, disagreed. So we're all set. We're just moving right along here. This is called Pre-Columbian Intersections. I live in Columbia, South Carolina. This is kind of a walking around town sort of poem, just around my neighborhood. It goes like this. Oh, I should also say, it mentions Henry Timrod is known as the poet of the Confederacy. He was actually a pretty good poet, but he was also what he was. Also, of course, Wade Hampton III was the governor of South Carolina who cut the deal with the president Rutherford B. Hayes to end Reconstruction, and they're both buried in the churchyard that comes into this poem. So it's called Pre-Columbian Intersections. Tugaloo descends and crosses Waccamaw, each street named for a native tribe or place like others hereabout. Tugaloo becomes Burney Drive, for 30 some odd years, our home address. Like a comma along the way of a sentence on a page, it winds uphill and needs no period till it tees into Shandon, named for an antebellum Episcopalian divine at Trinity. Though generically post-Protestant and unchurched, as a docent there, I reconsider gospels and parables and acts wherever light breaks through stained glass in clerestory and nave. Given they bring to mind live issues, Governor Wade Hampton and poet Henry Timrod seem more self-consciously dead than other silent churchyard citizens. Our babies first drew breath at Palmetto Baptist. At Shandon Prez, we signed them up for Youth League basketball, awaiting what's to come. American dissonance in subdivisions near the heart of town, on familiar streets, named after long ago leaders, tribes, and places. Etowah, Catawba, Kiowa, Osceola, Congaree. Those are, I'm right in the midst of all those streets from where I'm zooming. I grew up on Juanita Street in Tucson. I don't know if I have a poem. I do have poems that mention it, but I don't know now. But anyway, Vertigos, you can see Vertigos in italics. So it's a reference to the Hitchcock movie. And my daughter and my wife and I went out to visit my sister and her family, who live in the Bay Area there in Walnut Creek. And we wanted to go, among other places, to the Museum of the Legion of Honor, which is where Vertigo kind of takes off from, where Kim Novak pretends to, sits in front of the painting and pretends to be the, wife of the guy who hired Jimmy Stewart to track her down and see what was up with her. So this is when we got there, we wanted to see this painting, but it was not, there's just a blank space on the wall. So my daughter very cleverly went and sat on the bench and was just looking at the wall. And she didn't tip us off. So we looked over and there she was. And so that's what this poem is about, that moment. Vertigo to my daughter at the Museum of the Legion of Honor in San Francisco. Behold the empty space that typically holds Carlotta's likeness, or a copy of it, out on loan or in the shop for restoration now, while you are seated on that wooden bench. Dressed like someone else, Kim Novak tricked Jimmy Stewart into thinking he'd killed someone before he killed someone else. Earlier, he'd seen her on that bench, looking at what's now missing, or a copy of it, where you are seated looking now at the empty space that typically holds Carlotta's likeness, or a copy of it. Nobody's there and never was. Together, we're present at its absence for a moment shared. Some vanishing point puts all this in perspective. Keep that point in mind. Enjoy the view, and I will too. And then this poem is called Time and Again, and it's about a road trip I just took with my son out west. That's when I went to Tucson in May. But we stopped along the way at Chaco Canyon, Canyon de Chelly, Monument Valley, these Native American places. And it was a wonderful trip in many, many ways. But that's the part, the Chaco Canyon visit is the part that I'm kind of getting at here. Well, Chaco Canyon was discovered, not too long ago, actually, by a woman named Anna Sofar. The way the buildings are aligned with the solstice and equinox and the lunar phases. And Chaco Canyon has been a challenge to archaeologists. And there's a movie that Robert Redford narrates called The Mystery of Chaco Canyon. There's also a very capable archaeologist who says wonderful videos about what Chaco Canyon really was, kind of demystify a take on it. So this is where we were on our road trip in the middle of the NBA playoffs and the January 6th news. So taking time and again, taking time out from recaps of the playoffs and forecasts of the fate of the Republic, we thread the weave of overpass and highway, decked with images of sacred dancers amid the flora and fauna of the desert. Our road trip helps us enter worlds before the horse and gun and sync our sense of time with ancient ruins where the sun and moon suggest mysterious links between now vanished residents of Earth and skies above, yet hardly clarify why all the bother in the first place. Stonehenge comes to mind, and Abraham's prompt exit from Chaldea. There, stargazers sought to understand what powers above might guide the world below. Here, Chaco Canyon architects aligned a sandstone complex with celestial pathways, solstice and equinox, and lunar cycles. Is this some cosmic crossroads cut in stone by light, or almanac recording what practical people needed to know, or both? It takes a while to process why I'm here beside my son who finds our way. Just 1 second. Takes a while to process why I'm here too. Here we go. It takes a while to process why I'm here beside my son who finds our way and drives the interstate and back roads, though my father's post-war restlessness made it all happen once upon a time. His fungible profession tells why we dared to move across the country. But I was still surprised to learn of loans my frugal Scottish granddad gave him for the car that took us west and our adobe home in Tucson. Though he could strike a note of fear and wonder Sunday mornings, he never earned more than a modest $1, glossing where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Who knew or cares what memory contains, but can't explain in any way that matters now, unless another shares the fear and wonder of it all again under any moon on planet Earth. And then this is just a little envoy of a poem, and the last that I'll read, called Putting In. I was using it as an envoy to finish off the collection that I put together, but I've actually written a poem called Envoy to do that. But this is about, I think the only thing you really need to know is here is that if you don't, in a strainer, if you kayak, a strainer, named after like the colander that you drain your spaghetti in, but it's where a tree or something like that falls on the river, and then all the kind of flotsam and stuff gathers by it. And if you go over in your kayak and get caught in a strainer, good luck. It's a dangerous moment. So here, this is called Putting In. So, no need to be a hero, Dad. Sarah cautions me from carrying too much to our waiting SUV. Karen, Danny, and I are helping her move from Riverwalk and rented rooms she shared the past 2 years. Below the dock, the bright brown Takasiji runs. I hope to kayak much of my retirement away down there until injuries such as tendonitis sidelined me and fear of being stuck irretrievably upside down in a strainer on the tuck prompted me to shed my neon orange quick wicking gear and act my age. Though sore feet slow me down and I can hear the midnight chimes, the glimmering current's onward flow keeps dazzling me invitingly wherever it may go. Thank you very much. That's what I got. And I'm glad I could share it with you.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. Please, anyone who has a question or a comment, go ahead.
I have a question.
Please, yeah.
So, maybe you said this at the beginning, but how many of the poems that you read have been published? So
Oh,
I could access them.
I think about 5 out of 8 have been. Yeah,
Out of 8?
5 out of 8. Yeah, I think the last one hasn't been published, and the two longer ones haven't been published. Reading romance and also Time and Again. I think the others have been published.
Is there any way you could share with us the ones that have been published?
Oh, I'd be happy to. Yeah, I'd be very happy to. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. I just try to get out a screen share so I can see you in a larger way. I just feel like I might. Anyway, need instructions for this. Let me see. That maybe does it now. Yeah,
Well,
there we go. Hi, hi. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'd be delighted, really, to share them with you, just as I have been to share them with you now.
thank you.
I had a question. Thank you so much. Those were wonderful poems, and it was just such an honor to hear them and hear you read them so beautifully. And I was wondering, just what do you think when you're writing a poem? How do you think of form? Like, does it evolve into a certain kind of form? Do you write usually in free verse or blank verse, or is it anyway? Just any thoughts on that?
Well, as I say, I have this kind of irregular, relation to poetry in as much as I just stopped writing it for about 40 plus years. I had studied with Robert Fitzgerald and had taken a famous course he taught on versification at Harvard. And I was fortunate enough to study with Anthony Hecht. I'd fallen in love when I was in Italy. I fell in love with um, The Hard Hours, the '68 book that Hecht got the Pulitzer Prize for, I think. So I loved I loved Richard Wilbur, Robert Frost, Yeats, Philip Larkin. I love those poets growing up, and I just am kind of in a way sad that there will never be any poets who can get that close to me because I just took them so completely into, I just love them so much, and but then of course I taught Renaissance literature for 30 years, um, and that's a lot of blank verse. I mean, it was my good fortune to kind of enter by the Italian door and then find myself teaching Shakespeare because that's what people wanted to study. And that was such a treat. And so, and of course I taught Milton. I mean and so I just hear, I mean, Fitzgerald taught me how to do a lot of things with them. I mean, I think for example, if you read what's her name, Emily Wilson's translation in one hand, Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey, in the other hand, Robert Fitzgerald's. And if you see Emily Wilson, when she was reading that book when it was first out, was talking about how all the other translations, at least by I think Americans, were in free verse, and she would put up, Richmond Lattimore, okay, the fellow from Princeton, I forget his name right now, and then
Bagels.
Fagles, and then the opening of Robert Fitzgerald's, which has a half line, kind of like 7 lines in or something like that. But I mean, that is by and large a blank verse translation, and I'm not, I think Emily Wilson's done a good job with the poem actually, so I don't have a case there, but anyway, Fitzgerald, he just had a very subtle, fine ear. And I can't claim that for myself, but I did learn a lot from him. And then I was reading these kind of poets, and so I picked it up. And so I'm likely to start in some kind of iambic, and any length will do. Usually then we'll break down into ballad meter at some stage if there's shorter lines. But kind of like trimeter, trimeter through pentameter is what I usually operate. And I really, I just have a lot of that in my ear. And I like, I mean, for example, if again, to go back to that comparison, which I don't want to turn into a controversy, but diction is so important, like word choice, right? Word choice, writing good sentences. And I think, I mean, if you compare, I would recommend like the beginning of book 5 of the Odyssey. Compare Wilson to Fitzgerald. How these precise word choices that Fitzgerald makes, and you can kind of blur over that by talking about formulaic composition in a poem like the Odyssey or the Iliad or Homeric composition. But that would be sort of, what do they call it? The imitative fallacy, right? Where you were, taking an excuse writing about boredom to become boring. So these, these things to me, like just diction and sentence structure, or not, incomplete sentences, but just that. So there's a lot. So I hear something coming through, I'm very grateful for it, and then I start fooling around, but it gives me a little field to work within, and I don't have to stay there. But if I didn't have any boundaries, I would get lost, I would.
Sure, sure. So I have would like to ask you something about the Emily Wilson translation, because I was in a seminar at St. John's College on the Odyssey, and when we used the Wilson translation, I think the problem is that you've got Greek dactylic hexameters being shoehorned into iambic pentameter, which was her choice. And so some of her, and you were talking about the importance of word choice. But I think that she jettisoned some of that word choice. There was, well, I won't continue that. But so translation is never a win-win, in the sense that if you make a constraint on yourself, then you're going to have to make choices that are going to won't be good for the diction, as you were saying.
Mhm.
I was wondering what you thought about that.
I mean, I think that uh, English poetry has a relationship to iambic pentameter, not unlike Homeric poetry has to dactylic hexameter. So of course there's no equivalence there, but what poems would you think of? Certainly, what are the great epic poems in English? Milton would be premier, right? And that's iambic, unrhymed, unrhymed iambic pentameter. And so I think, I mean, this may seem like a little bit of an excursion, but I love, there's a famous review by Ezra Pound of Lawrence Binyon's translation of the Divine Comedy. This in the Criterion magazine. He starts off, he says, "Who would have thought that Lawrence Binyon, poisoned in the cradle by the intolerable dog biscuit of Milton's rhetoric, could come up with such a magnificent translation, which is in terza rima in English." And of course, Pound was, if he was close to anything, he was close to the Divine Comedy in Italian terza rima. I mean, but Fitzgerald is doing things like just the beginning of book 11. He's imitating Pound's appropriation, if you will, of that, whatever it is, 15th, 16th century Latin. What is it, Latin translation of the Iliad or the Odyssey or something that, and then went down to the sea, put whatever.
Like Quiet Divas.
Yeah. But it's, yeah, anyway. So, I mean, Fitzgerald's doing a lot of different things, but I think basically he's writing, good sentences in iambic pentameter with phenomenal word choice. And there are, I mean, I would think that's a great thing about English is the range of the kinds of words that we have to choose from. So, but so those guys, I mean, anyway, that's the fast forward 40 years or so. It's nice to see.
Lawrence, two questions. One, first of all, like I love 6 Degrees of Separation, and I didn't know until now that you'd studied with Fitzgerald. I knew about Hecht because we had talked about that before. But if you could give us just a glimpse of the two men as mentors, as teachers, even beyond necessarily their intellectual propensities, maybe just something about how it was to be with them in a room. And then my second part of the question is why the 40-year eclipse of poetry?
Well, I would say, I mean, Fitzgerald was just a very kind of gentle, quiet teacher, you know, with uh, very clear and precise observations. And I mean, I have notes from his class still, actually. And I mean, they're just he wrote in this very spidery kind of, you know, thin pen on the margins, and um, but he you know he heard things or made me able to hear things that I wouldn't have been able to hear or identify. I think um, he was going through kind of a rough time when I had him because I had him for two courses. I also had him for the narrative poetry course that he taught. But he was just, it was a full and interesting hour of 2 hours, I mean, seminar once a week, where he just made fine and usable comments. And he'd hand back your paper with that sort of attention on the poems that you turned in. So I was very lucky to have such a teacher. I mean, I had other wonderful teachers. Anthony Hecht, I had just fallen in love with the hard hours when Hecht came, and you know, Fitzgerald was retiring from the Boylston professorship, and I think they were looking Hecht over. Of course, it would go to Seamus Haney. Um, but Hecht was in a very happy place. You know, he had gotten remarried. He had a little Evan, his 6-year-old, uh, not 6-year-old, 6-month old. He was living in the top of Leverett House on the 10th floor. I mean, one of the most affirmative things that any teacher ever said to me was when Anthony Hecht asked me to, he said, they want me to do an interview for the Advocate. I told him I'd do it if you conducted the interview. And,
Mm,
you know, God bless him. That felt good to have him say that to me, you know. But
mm,
he was, I have a lot of Anthony Hecht, you know, I think he was a mensch, as they say. You know, think of his military experience, you know, coming out of Bard College, like 2 years into Bard College or less, recruited into the infantry, opening
mm.
up, you know, Flossenburg, which I think is kind of an annex of Buchenwald or something like that. That was how he spent, you know, his 20th or 21st year, I believe. And then he came back, and I think he went. I know he'd gone to Bard. I know there are pictures. He went out to where everybody was going to Kenyon, and to work with Crow Ransom. But he got a master's degree from Columbia, and I think he was very interested in metaphysical poetry and all. But he was, you know, the last poem I wrote before this stopping a long time writing, he told me was he thought the best poem I'd ever written. But I'd broken up with my first wife then, and I drank too much, and you know, my life wasn't leading in places that you know, very rewarding places. I was looking for a job, so I had to clean up my act and go teach school. And that was a blessing in disguise, if there ever was one, to work with teenagers, you know, and to just learn how to sit still and talk frankly. That was a great good fortune for. I had no intention of going back to. I had, you know, reached the place where I had a dissertation in, you know, topic, but I wasn't even intending to go back and finish it, but I got lucky. I was teaching high school, and I got a fellowship for for independent school teachers and I had a year at Columbia. And there, my whole Italian thing had, places I could go that people I could talk to. And I got encouragement. And I went back to New Orleans thinking, well, that was nice, but now let's go back to work. And I was just quite bored after about 6 weeks, and I had to do what I could to get out of there. And why did I quit? I think I quit because it was so damn hard. The way I went about it, just so hard to write poetry, and also to write poetry when you didn't, when you're having a hard time, just like getting a halfway decent job and earning a living. And so that was where I was at. I don't think, other people were handling these sorts of challenges quite well. So I'm not, I'm nobody's role model here, but so then I just, for a long time, I would scribble a little bit, but I always felt, well, I'll tell you this also, I always felt that, because of poetry, writing was much more interesting to me, and I could write better. And I had this another wonderful teacher of mine was Robert Coles, the child psychiatrist, and he was just he was a very kind, supportive teacher of mine, and he had a moral voice, and a moral voice which connected with young people. And when I started writing again, I mean, just writing things, I was writing about high school curriculum or something like that. Or I was trying to get this fellowship at Columbia, and I could, and I could hear that voice about the stakes of choices that young people were making, right in my presence in a fancy, independent school in Metairie, Louisiana. If they cheated, right, that mattered, right? Or if just a little, just for a spelling test or something. And that voice of Bob Coles, and my admiration for him, what's really animated me and made me able to write prose better, and sense that, it mattered. Um, and so that I had these wonderful teachers, and then, I mean, that I ended up writing about Stanley Cavell was terrific. And Cavell was another wonderful human being. And I asked when I got, I was writing about Shakespeare, and I kept making all these footnotes to Hollywood movies because of Cavell's writing about comedy and melodrama. Like I'm writing about Much Ado About Nothing, and I'm appealing to Cary Grant or, Katharine Hepburn, because I can just feel the moral stakes in the dialogue of such a movie, or the interaction in such a movie. And finally, I just kind of flipped the script and went from the footnotes to writing about Cavell, to writing essays about Cavell. And I asked Coles, could I do an interview for Cavell in Double Take? And he said, yeah, that would be great. And so I wrote. I'd met Stanley here and there, but it was very nice to be interviewing him, because we went to lunch every week, for much of a summer, and just talked. I took no notes, but but and so that was an enabling thing for me as well. And that's so then I just felt, really, when I was coming near retirement, the first poem I think I ever wrote, when retirement was approaching, was that poem called Cities of Words. It wasn't called that then, but it was just kind of being being at the metro stop back in Lisbon, where I had been before, that kind of began to come together for me.
Well, thank you
At the
so
time.
much, Lawrence. That was so really powerful reading. I love the way you read. I feel like it was just that, as you described, teaching to learning to sit still and speak frankly. It just, I really felt the power of simplicity and your heartfelt approach to poetry. So
Well,
let's hope you're going to be like the grandma Moses of poetry. And
okay.
she started
Well,
painting when she was 80 years old.
Okay, well, I'm
So
pushing 80, but I haven't got there yet. But as we may have said in Tucson, I don't know, right back at you, Lucian. Thank you very much. And
thank you.
Philip,
Thank you
I'm
so much.
delighted to hear you read too.
And we now welcome Philip Meters, who I had the great pleasure of meeting in Seattle in March at the AWP conference, where he was on a wonderful panel about spiritual poetry. And it was a really fascinating talk. And I happened to go up after the talk and introduce myself. And that's why we now are graced by his presence at Poetry Junkies. Philip, please.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks, Lawrence, for your presentation. Your voice is hypnotic, and I particularly was affected by vertigo for whatever reason. That sense that in the context of your thinking about, sort of late work and just confronting disappearance in some sense, right? I just found that very powerful. So thank you. I'm going to share my screen as well, just to give you something to look at, so except other than just myself and the books in the background. And I guess you can see Anna Akhmatova down there, the great Russian poet, in the behind my shoulder there. So I'll just share my screen here. I'm going to share maybe 4 poems of my own and then a couple translations sort of mixed in from 2 books that are forthcoming. One is called Fugitive Refuge, and this will be coming out next year. And so I'll just read a bit of I'll read the first poem and then some other poems and maybe talk about it a little bit. So this first poem is called Plague Psalm, and I would just call it a kind of a remix of the great Hebrew Psalm 40. And it was written at a time when I was scuffling about, as we all were, in that early hectic and paranoiac phase of the pandemic. Plague Psalm 40. I wait in the waiting room of my room for you, dear doctor, to lean down and listen to the weird music in my chest. Draw me out of the mire of terminal detention, renewable distress. I'm surrounded, suffocated inside a gated state. The wind scribbles invitations, only tethered branches answer. Maestro, steady my starlings, for you I hunger. Lift your baton and stuff my mouth with singing. So as a lifelong asthmatic, the prospect of getting COVID and seeing people literally just stop being able to breathe was terrifying to me. Actually, I have a daughter who has long COVID right now. She's a 20-year-old who can't run. It's absolutely catastrophic, and we're still going through it. This book, Fugitive Refuge, in a sense, is a set of poems sort of that sort of range the world. But the fundamental question and problem of the book was the problem of forced global human right migration and the longing for home, which we all have. And in the process of over the last few years, reading about and seeing images of the mass migrations that have happened from Syria and from Afghanistan and from Africa and from Ukraine, I started to think about my own family's journey, ancestral journey from Lebanon. My great-grandfather was exiled from Lebanon and then settled in Mexico, where after some years of running a dry goods store in Salina Cruz was murdered. And so my grandfather and his family migrated north to the United States. And I wanted to sort of look at that journey and to imagine certain moments of it. My grandfather was a very hard and difficult man, but I think he was hard and difficult because of what he suffered and how he suffered it. That he was a sensitive boy who had to see things that no one should ever have to see. So I wanted to write a poem from his perspective as he moves into the United States. It's called The Arab Crosses into Los Estados Unidos. Once I bathed in new phrases, spoke with a star throat, silked in sentences, curled inside the parentheses of dream. Once my father bent a dime between his index and his thumb, snapped a house from air, swallowed gold fire captured in singing glass. Glass sang from his circling touch. But when they came for him, he danced to their orchestra of bullets. We did not wait to tuck him safely into earth, raise his name in stone. What we buried beneath our ribs. At the border of the country of the future, I own nevers, dusty keys with no receiver. I carry him and cross the river. In the process of doing a bunch of genealogical research, particularly during COVID, I got in touch with folks who live in Salina Cruz, hoping to find his grave. I was not able to do so, even though there was a really, really helpful local woman. Most likely, he was buried in a site that is unmarked, and I really was kind of sad about that because I had hoped to go to Salina Cruz before COVID hit, and to just pay my respects. But I realized after working on the poems that we're all carrying our dead with us. We're all carrying our ancestors with us. And so I need to know proof that he existed. I am the proof that he existed. And he rests insofar as I can help him rest in these poems. So that was my goal and my hope. I want to share with you a poem a little bit further in history, actually from my dad's perspective. My dad grew up in Brooklyn Heights, New York, and his uncle and his father never got along. There was a fight that happened way back in the day, and I'll show you a photo. Can you see this on your screen, the photo of them?
Yeah.
Okay. Back in the day, my grandfather, also Phil, and his brother Sam were very close, and they boxed, they fought together, they played together, but there was an estrangement that lasted over 20 years. Probably everybody's family has this. So it was a mystery to my dad, who, as a young person, had never met his uncle, and then one day he did. And this is a poem sort of about their meeting and about the mystery of these kinds of family fights. From thy face shall I be hid, Brooklyn Heights, 1948. It's my father speaking. Like a man fighting against his mirror, two brothers circled, fists aloft, no words. I couldn't tell my uncle from my father. Years before, how did they watch their father confront the gang alone? In his blood, in his own blood, like a man crashing against a mirror he'd fall in. No forgiving the other what each himself had failed to stop. Why could I not tell I'd seen my uncle to my father? At Sahadi's, I thought he was my father, ahead in line. I'm Uncle Sam, he said. Like a man feuding against his mirror, he bought me 3 meat pies. My father gave me prunes and the belt. Uncle patted my head. No one knew why Uncle and my father refused to speak for years. Now I hold the picture, homing in, no space between their leaning heads. They aim for the heart. A man brawls his mirror. I can't tell my father from my father. I had the great good fortune of being invited to go to Beirut, to Lebanon, and just see the places that my grandfather came from, and his family. And I wanted to just share one poem from that visit, which is in the manuscript, called The Beggars of Beirut. Now I have to find it. My apologies. Where is it? Hello. Give me 1 second here. It's not there. I've disappeared my own poem. That's frightening. Where is it? There it is. Okay. The beggars of Beirut cup their tender palms to catch an eye, a drop of compassion, a grain of guilt itching inside our shell. This one scrolls through the dumpster like a daily digital feed, translating trash to dinner. That one, aged one, adjusts her hijab, collapsed in the shadow beneath a high rise, each window naked of glass. She doles out packages of napkins, searching my face for need. This boy sells gum. No, a pleading smile, the gum, the key to the house of mercy. That one sells stubs to a ballet that once featured her lissome legs. Today, she prays aloud to us, imperturbable gods with the leisure to ignore the cries. My lost sisters, my dear sons, my done uncles and drained mothers, my beloved broken fingers, you tap me to the spine, column climbing my clouded sight and past, rising to a place so high and so far, we can't be told or held apart. So, okay, I wanted to just shift and read two poems from a book of translations of a Russian poet who's currently living in exile. His name is Sergei Gondlevsky. I got really, really obsessed with Russian literature and Russians many years ago during the Cold War, and fell in love with the literature. Of course, that's why Akhmatov is behind me, just giving me protection. And this poet who I met was in his early 40s at the time, and I just absolutely just found his work mesmerizing and himself mesmerizing, and came to translate him first in a book that came out in 2003, A Kindred Orphanhood, and now a book that's coming out in the fall, a kind of new selected poems called Ochre and Rust. And this is a poem called In a Poet's Vegetal Life. I thought I would read poems from two phases of life's journey. This is sort of coming up well, I think this is an early phase of self-questioning that sometimes we go through. And then I'll read a poem where you're sort of feeling bitter about how life wound up, but also wanting to hold on to what is beautiful in it. So, in a poet's vegetal life, there is an ill-fated phase when he shies away from heaven's light and fears only human judgment. From the bottom of an urban well, scattering grains to gray pigeons, he swears he'll give someone hell when he gets the chance. But then, thank God, on the dacha porch where jasmine reaches shoulder high, we learn from Vivaldi's seizure fit of violin how to fly. And now an emptiness soars, and from the emptiness of height, the soul crashes down, passes out, till flowers tickle the shoulders. The truth is, we're dumb as dirt. We act like cowards, get plastered. From agitation, snap matches, and out of weakness, break dishes. We vow to speak the blunt truth, point blank as it is, not flatter. Yet a poem's no weapon of wrath, but a wellspring of silver honor. I should say that Gonlevsky's poems are deeply classical in form, very metrical, very, very rhymed. This was a poem that I didn't feel the ability and courage to translate for the first book because I mean, it's hard to end a poem on such a sort of like specific set message, but I think he gets there in Russian because of all of the music that the poem contains. So that's an early poem of Sergei Gondlevsky. And I'd like to read a later poem, Gondlevsky, as well.
Philip, I'll just interject briefly. I think you need to stop sharing your screen and then restart because we're not seeing those poems yet.
Thanks for letting me know. Okay. Well, you heard that one at least, so you'll see this one. Sorry. Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, this is called, well, this is a funny little truism about Russian poetry. Many lyric poems lack titles, and it's always a difficulty to know what to do in a translation into English, because titles are very much our thing. Even our untitled poems are called untitled, right? So ridiculous. So this poem is untitled, but everyone knows Russian poetry by its first title, lyric poems. My elderly youth, my youthful old age, I hereby submit for classified use. There's plenty of everything, all of it worthless, and what's at hand won't last the day. If only I never had to see how my time drags to the collective non-existence, to be left completely destitute and rhyme. Let's bid farewell for future use, my star, my best. If I hand you over to the bastards and bums, I'll ask in the end, it's me you don't forget. For your black day, it's best to hide them. In the wardrobe's naked mirror, snow lit, the reflections of our tenderloin flesh, to know by heart the breathing of your desire, and to have, when summoned to the chamber, that memory as part of our personal effects. And one last poem for you, which is the last poem of Fugitive Refuge, sort of a prayer, another prayer poem. So wishing you all light from Cleveland, Ohio, and not too much light for those of you who are experiencing the hellishness of too much, but that interior light. Devotional. Light my face and light the flesh of my flesh. Light each my eyes and light inside my sight. Light the light that makes me light in the bones, and in my hands light, and in my loins light. And light your light before and behind me, above and beneath me. Light to my right and light to left. Light to my enemies who in the moral dark will use my light against me. Light the dull swords of my ribs, the thick fist within. Light the blood-hot rooms pulsing there. Light the gates when they swing wide to the stranger. Light more light on my tongue. In the light, light, more light. In the black, light. And when it's time to snuff this wick, light that light. Thanks everybody for listening. It's good to be with you.
Thank you, Philip. Wow, wonderful reading. And you do something that I noticed Robert Creeley was able to do very well in his readings, which is to kind of have tears in his voice before he had tears on his face and keep them there. Marvelous, marvelous work. I have thoughts, but let's open it to the floor, please. Anyone who has questions, comments.
I just noticed that you have Arabic inscriptions and throughout your book. Is that right? Could you talk about that?
Oh, sure. Well, the first page actually has a little bit of Arabic, which just says, ahla sahla, ahlan sahlan, which means it means welcome in the most literal sense, but it also more poetically means sort of your family, and this place is easy for you. This place is, treat it like home. It means flat, right? I think it means family, a family in a flat space. And I wanted to have some Arabic, partly because I'm learning it. It's not my native tongue. and partly because I wanted to have a little bit of the vestiges of that which Arabic speakers would understand, but that which those who do not speak or read would have to sort of wonder about. Um, so yeah, so there's a poem in there which is a footnote poem, which is like the whole poem is a translation of a poem, and then underneath are a series of notes that are somewhat about the poem, but also tell another story. So yeah, I don't know, like I wanted to honor that ancestry and to enter into something that's complicated, yeah, and for a reader. Do you
I
know any
noticed in
Arabic?
that.
Sorry, go ahead, Roy.
No, it's just I noticed in the end of the crossing the river with their ancestors, the dead, the line breaks. There seemed to be that transition from the beginning of the poem. The end of it kind of almost reminded me of William Carlos Williams with the way the lines were arranged. I just was wondering if that significance in that choice of line, dispensation or whatever.
Yeah, thank you. That poem began as a sort of a playful imitation of The Negro Speaks of Rivers,
Mhm.
you know?
Nice and good, yeah.
And there's a couple echoes that still remain, but it goes way, departs. But that poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers by Langston Hughes, is a poem about origins, right? And an attempt to sort of claim space of a sort of trans-historical belonging and a trans-geographical belonging, I suppose, as well. So that poem, I was really struggling with the form of it and how it looked on the page. I was not happy with it for a while. I couldn't quite figure out, it didn't feel right to me. But that poem is dealing with dispersal, of translation, of fragmentation. And so I think one of the readers, I said, I just don't feel right about how this poem's going. They said, well, just like, I think the ending needs a little bit more breathing space, a little bit more room to sort of to linger over, because there's a big leap that's going to happen for this person in this moment. And so that to me meant to try to just open up the white space a little bit, the silence
Very,
around that.
very
So,
effective, I thought.
oh, thank you. I'm glad to hear that, because I, you know,
A little
you never know.
diaspora.
You try things. Yeah.
Are there any Arabic poets that you have been especially influenced by?
Well, funny you should mention, everyone's favorite New Age poet, Khalil Gibran, was actually someone that my family knew, and he stayed with them in New York in the early 1920s. The family story was he wrote some of the Prophet at our house, but I imagine that that's a bit of mythologizing. I honestly think he's underrated. I mean, obviously, there's something, um, there are moments, certainly the Victorian language of the Prophet is a little treacly, but I really like the work. I really like the work around that too, like his aphoristic work. And I forgot I think it's a book called Sea and Foam or something like that. Interestingly, I was reading it in Beirut because I thought, okay, I'm going to read Gibran, because Gibran was doing a lot of interesting things in both Arabic poetry and in English poetry, challenging certain, pieties about what it should be and how it should sound. And I noticed that there's a line, something like, and you all will know, you Dylan fans, something like, one not being born is dying. One not being born is dying. Something like, I'll find the exact quote for you, but Bob Dylan was reading Gibran when he wrote that that famous song where he says, "He not busy being born is busy dying." So we all knew Dylan was a thief, but I didn't know he was a thief of Gibran. So that was kind of fun to explore. Of contemporary poets, it's hard not to feel a certain measure of awe and admiration for Mahmoud Darwish, the great Palestinian poet. He's a beautiful and challenging poet. If you don't know his work, just Google him, Darwish. He has a wonderful selected collection called The Butterfly's Burden, translated by Fadi Judah, which I like a lot. There's a great long poem in there about it's called State of Siege, but he has these beautiful love poems. He's just really a great poet's poet. So I would say he's definitely someone I deeply admire. Someone who challenges me, who I don't always like, but is also really a visionary writer, is Etel Adnan, Eteladnan. More of a postmodern writer, I would say, in some ways, but also deeply revolutionary in her approach to poetry. I got really obsessed with this form called the Qasida form, which is a pre-Islamic form. And the whole book, Fugitive Refuge, is shaped in the form of a Qasida, which has 3 parts. I think of it a little bit like a Danteesque journey. There's a sort of an exile part, there's a kind of dealing with the hell part, and then there's like a sort of homecoming part. So I've been kind of intrigued by the old poets as well. So
Thank you.
thank you. Thank y'all for hanging out. I mean, like, I can't believe there's such a robust, beautiful Zoom still happening. Here we are 3 years into this madness that we're sort of living through collectively. I guess you find your community and it works. So that's awesome.
Bill, I don't know if it's a synchronicity or an anti-synchronicity, but it's amazing you brought up Gibran, because I have a manuscript for a novel, and I just removed a quote from Gibran under the counsel of the novelist Janet Fitch, who told me that she thought Gibran is just too overused. And and the quote that I was using is, "The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain." Which I just find a marvelous, really a marvelous statement, and it fits my book a lot. However, I may be able to kick out Dylan, because I quoted Dylan, "He not busy being born is busy dying." So be sure to get me the actual quote that Dylan robbed, and that way I can put Gibran back in with the true originator of that phrase. Of course, I'm guessing that Dylan slightly adjusted the line, maybe just kind of, fitted his own little diction to it.
Without question. Let me get it to you right now.
Okay.
I can pull it up. Well, it's a little different, but it's not. His is still really good. But Gibran said, "Love which is not always springing is always dying." So Dylan's genius remains intact.
Yeah.
But I think I know for a fact he was reading the book that this came from. It's known, like, I was reading his biography. So
Since your family got to know him, again, my God, the connection, 6 degrees of separation. Are there any anecdotes besides the fact that he may have written some of the prophet at your family's house? Anything else that you can give us? Us poetry junkies were really famished for gossip, especially literary gossip. So,
I mean, well, I did write a piece about him. I have another one in me, but I will. I'll share it in the link. It's called, sort of humorously, "I'm the 3rd most popular poet of all time." I don't know yeah, I don't remember who the first two were. But let's see. Oh yes, after Shakespeare and Lao Tzu. Let's see what did they tell me? That he didn't eat all the food that was served him, which so that he was kind of dainty, I guess, about his consumption. I mean, he died of cirrhosis of the liver, if I'm not mistaken. So this was someone who probably drank himself to death. Probably, I don't know. Yeah. What else? Yeah. So there's the translation of the letter in this piece that I shared with you. What else? I think the piece says it better than anything I could say right now, except yes, he was picky about.
I have another question for you. Just because we got to see your manuscript, I noticed that you have this very interesting image of a kind of doorway, and it looked from the glimpse that we caught of it, that it's like a kind of door made of thread or something. And Prague, for those of you who don't know, one of the etymologies of the word Prague is threshold. So I'm guessing you were kind of wanting that door to serve as a kind of point of entrance into the book. But maybe you could tell us about that work of art or whatever it is and why it's resonant for you.
Oh, sure. My hope is that will be one of the cover images of the book, or the cover image. There's a Japanese artist named Shiharu Shiota, and maybe I could just share my screen so you could see some of the other images. These are installations, and yes, these massive web-like thread structures, and there's a sort of open door that's in the center of it. I just found this one really interesting, but the ones that I first saw were the ones of boats with keys dangling from thread. I really find them just absolutely haunting. They're a little bit hard to see that these are keys and that this is actually a photograph. I mean, they don't look like photographs at all, but they are. To me, these just speak about the precarity of human existence across, in migration. I'm absolutely blown away by them. I don't really have words for them, but I just find them really, really, really unforgettable. Yeah. So Shiharu Shiota is her name.
Did you actually get to know her at all?
No, in fact, I've never even seen an installation in person. I don't remember when, but I came across it online and I just got obsessed with the work. So.
Wow, it's remarkable, really powerful, very evocative. Wow.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Philip, would you mind sharing the link to the artist in the chat?
Sure. Let me see if I mean was
They're
there a link?
incredible images.
Oh, thank you. Oh yeah, there's the link. Okay. So,
Thank you very much.
yeah, sure.
And Philip, since the topic came up of mentors, I mean, who have been your own personal mentors as a poet?
Well, living teachers, a guy named Robert Cording, who I met at Holy Cross. As an undergraduate, I also had workshops with Cyrus Cassels. And in graduate school, David Wojan was my thesis advisor. He was very important to me. Yusuf Komunyakaa as well, really fantastic poet. Let's see, I think translation was a kind of mentor mentorship for me, working with poets, trying to bring their work into another language, both with a teacher and with the poets themselves. Um, yeah, I love courting because he took me seriously, even though I was writing absolutely dreadful poems, like really horrible, horrible undergraduate poems. And he just like saw in little Ernest me someone to believe in. And I'll never forget that. And to think of poetry as a spiritual endeavor, I think, is something that's very much a part of his work. From David Wojan, I think I learned a passion for the sonnet and for forms, also for mixing and remixing classical and contemporary, subjects. So, trying to speak about the sort of the world that we confront every day, but also bring that into the tradition and stuff like that. So yeah. So I see in the chat someone saying they love Bob courting, and yeah. So and David, and I mean that's all. I think that a good teacher is someone who both sees you in in your passions, and helps you rise above where you are, helps you make it to the next level. It's so weird, like I used to be, I don't know, some of us might have had this experience with a mentor. You want to send all your work to them, but there's this point where you have to stop doing that, and it's a very painful moment, where you have to kind of become your own person, your own writer, your own therapist, your own whatever it is that you do. And I remember that moment as being really hard, but he was very graceful about suggesting it, actually, like I think you can just, I think you're ready just to kind of, you don't need me and my approval. In fact, I want to see where you go after this. And so very grateful for that as well. And we're friends to this day. So
You said something remarkable when you were talking about the poem about your ancestor, and you said, I needed no proof of his existence. I am the proof of his existence. And could you tell us a little bit more about that, and how also you see your own poems as proof of your existence?
yeah, I mean, it is true probably for a lot of us who write. We feel as if we're connected to ourselves in the world um, through writing, and it's as necessary as eating or walking or um, anything else. And I definitely feel that way. That writing is my own trance practice, my own meditation practice, my own healing practice, I guess. So as regards this idea of ancestry, I think I've just become more interested in um, ancestry as I've aged, and knowing that we are ourselves, but we're not just ourselves, but we are the carriers of those who came before us in some way. And there's this wonderful, I think it's a Linda Hogan quote where she talks about stopping and feeling like the love of all of her ancestors are present with her. Um, and that to me struck me as true somehow, and I'm not sure why. Have you heard the term ancestor hunger? Anybody? Ancestor hunger. I have felt that quite powerfully and strongly, and I think some of it is the same reason we think and talk about ghosts, like that things in the past persist, but in a way that's unresolved or painful or something like that. And I do think that writing this book has been an opportunity for me to have a conversation with my ancestor, particularly Iskandar, who died, means Alexander in Arabic. Um, and through that to try to heal some of the wounds of a kind of masculinity that my grandfather and father inherited. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah,
Do you have, Philip, siblings?
I do. I have a brother and a sister. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, do you ever get in those conversations where they don't remember it quite the way you do? And I mean, is that, I find those are interesting conversations that as you're sort of putting together what becomes you, although it's, which I agree with, you're really assembling their past in a rather public way, particularly if you're talking to them about it.
Yeah.
And of course, we all had different experiences of the generation before us, even if we were all in the same household. But I know, I mean, one of my wonderful kind of discoveries about my grandfather, the grandfather taught me how to play golf, was that he lent, and I have it in that poem actually about Chaco Canyon, that he lent my father money to buy a car and to buy a house when we moved to Tucson. And he was, anything but a man of means. He was a very humble, you know, in worldly possessions. And I encountered, I've encountered on many occasions my siblings disagreeing with how I remember things, but that was, I kind of had the receipts because I have papers of his where literally, he's kind of keeping score. But I also, I just was rereading the novel by Eudora Welty, beautiful novel, The Optimist's Daughter, and she really becomes her ancestors at the end of. That's really a part of the function of memory, that when she's able to leave Mississippi and go back to Chicago and realizes that there's nothing there that matters, that isn't a part of her, that she takes with her through her own memory, if you will, through her own recovery. And but it is fun. I just think it's fun to kind of check one's memory against that of others. And
Totally.
and also once you write it, it is put in a particular way, right? And the particularity of that expression in its own way is an arrogation, let's call it, a kind of takeover, right?
Yeah.
Which maybe you have to do to write a poem, you have to.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, your reflection brings up so many interesting um, points and cans of worms. Let's just say, right? Is the author taking more, taking truths away from others in a sense? Because I mean, I suppose that's been a part of writing since the beginning, right? Who can write the history, right? The lion has no
Yeah.
history because yeah. So I was thinking, we're all I heard recently, and you said it as well, we're all born into different families, even though we're siblings. We're literally born into different families in the sense that our parents are a different age. There's a different configuration of those around us, and that really I think is really true. My sister and brother and I share so much, but we're also so completely different. Um, and yes, I love talking with them, and I think every writer who feels that strength in themselves about their own emotional truth to also talk with those who had those experiences with them, because it's so interesting just to hear what things people remember. You know, I said this is a little bit painful, but I had a vague memory of my dad getting really angry at some point growing up, and like holding, like gripping a knife when my sister had said something, and I felt it very strongly, but I didn't really know if it happened. You know what I mean? And I told my sister, and she's like, "Oh yeah, to this day I'm afraid of knives." I'm like, so that she really remembered that, and I
Mhm.
felt it, but she, you know, that was like a absolutely formative or deformative, like moment in her growing up. So anyway.
Yeah,
My dad-
using photographs too, like it looks to me like your uncle and your father are just boxing because they do have gloves on, you know.
Yes.
But I have a line in a poem that I read, about my grandfather. He was 5'2", just about my size, getting kind of washed out of the baseball team at age 12. And that was given to me by photograph, really, because I just look up there and that line came into the poem much later after I saw this photograph and it kind of, in a way, was inspired by my daughter because she's quite short and conscious of it in a way that helps me understand, in a way, I'm kind of translating her feelings into my own psyche as it's represented by that reference or by that response to the photo.
Yeah.
Yeah, psychologists actually have this term, the Rashomon effect, which they take from the Japanese film of Akira Kurosawa, where several different people view the same, murder, but they tell completely different truths, and they're all telling the truth. Nobody's lying. They just had different perspectives on what happened because of who they were and where they were and what pieces of the puzzle that they actually were privy to have first person access to. So now it's entered, as I said, psychological like language, the Rashomon effect. I was also going to throw in the comment that, the mother of Tobias and Jeffrey Wolfe, the two memoirists, she once remarked, God, if I knew that both my sons were going to be writing memoirs, I would have lived differently. Which I always thought was just very funny. And I don't know if either you, Phil, or you, Lawrence, would like to talk about that topic of how people around you might be feeling about becoming subjects of your poems.
Well, I mean, my sister's very loyal to me, and I think my brothers kind of could care less. I mean, they care about me, but poetry's not a thing in their world, And whereas my sister, whom we all love, we're all guys. So I think that that's part of what we love about her. I think is that she would care. But she does. I mean, she's the one who argued with me about my grandfather's ability to make loans to our father. but yeah, I mean, the idea that you take your past with you, that you kind of have inherited the past, and that is also kind of an act of creation, right? That you can say with confidence, "They're with me," that is a productive act of your own spirit, let's call it.
I would say there are two really opposed, the total polarity. I saw someone quoted Joan Didion saying like that the writer is a sort of traitor or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
There's that,
Always,
right? And then the other side is people like Hiese Layman who literally use the writing as an opportunity to deepen or to go back to people who that he's written about, namely his mother, his grandmother, um, to ask them like, this is what I remember, like, what was it like for you? And then he's able to bring that as a sort of medium or technology of further conversation, and everything in between, I suppose. I appreciate the fact that we're at a historical moment where we're asking questions about the writer's responsibility towards those they represent, particularly those who don't have power or voices. I think that's a very important correction. But there's also the opposite of that, is a kind of like a shyness about the imagination, that it's those who say it's utterly impossible and unethical to imagine anyone else's perspective, and I think that is also a diminishment and um, a kind of um, rejection of something that I think is very powerful in us, which is that we actually can understand each other, at least part way.
Both you and Lawrence, Phil, if you could respond to this question, if being a writer has taught me anything, it has taught me.
That it?
Oh wait, is he frozen or is this like a fill in the blank?
It's the fill in the blank.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
You didn't see the ellipsis in the air there? Okay.
I thought it was, but then I wasn't sure. I'm like, man, he's very still. Like, I think for me, I would say if being a writer has taught me anything, it has taught me that the best writing takes its own time, and we need to be attentive to that unfolding. And also, I think that the corollary to that is, I think some of us worry that we won't be able to write the things we really need to write about, but we'll always be writing. If we're writing, truly, we'll always be writing the things that we must write about and into. Our obsessions will always be there, and they won't go away. So.
I do agree, and maybe this is just because of my age, but I do agree with how writing the poems that I've written helps me know myself. It helps me not only know myself, but in a way return to myself when when I've kind of forgotten or gone more or less kind of gone, into a place where it's not that good to be. That is, I mean, I think like when you retire, as I did in really 2016, that you just enter a world which has very different structures to it, and you don't appreciate. I mean, I loved doing what I did for a living. Frankly, I really enjoyed being an English professor. So that there's that. But I didn't. The structures, the place I used. One of the things I loved about that was that you could write papers and people would sit still and listen to them. And if you were funny, they'd be delighted because lots of other people there weren't very funny. it was kind of a chore, And I mean, I can remember one wonderful Italian professor up in Wisconsin who came up to a friend of mine and me and said, I always go to your panels because you guys are, and of course we were doing scholarly work, but there was a kind of spirit to the writing. And I think, I mean, as I said, I think, first of all, I think about mentors that often the mentor needs you. You're going to your presence and appreciation. I mean, I've had mentors who send me home with a heck of a lot to read that they wrote. And they want to have that conversation. They want you to know what they're up to, and they appreciate it. And in different ways, they're hospitable to this kind of friendship, which is really a conversation. And I mean, Cavell would say that it comes alive, thought comes alive in conversation. And, he wrote a lot, but he talked a lot with others and listened and knew the value of that. And so, last night I was sitting with a dozen friends talking about The Optimist's Daughter. and it was a wonderful evening. And we were just talking about, I mean, we were talking about different things, but that everybody was obviously quite literally on the same page, and they had quite different thoughts about the page that we were all on at any given turn. But that book I wouldn't have loved rereading it so much if I didn't know I was going to see those friends and talk to them about it, let's say. And teaching was like that for me too. I mean, it was always just kind of trying to, make things up that were intelligible to the people that I was in conversation with in classroom. And to have that sustained, I mean, I feel very fortunate to have had a life like that where there were these books and then there were these people. And they came alive so often when we were together talking about them. And as I say, my life, there are different structures now, but I seek that kind of conversation with others. And it's animating. It really turns me on.